While Hollywood has ignored this story, a small Indiana town was shattered by a crime. So calculated, so cold, and so close to home that it changed the way an entire community understood the meaning of trust. A killer walked among his neighbors for years, attending the same stores, the same streets, the same ordinary spaces as the families he would devastate. 2 teenage girls were murdered on a sunny February afternoon in 2017, and the man eventually convicted of those murders had already been interviewed by the very police hunting him. This is the story of the Delphi Murders, and the world deserves to know every detail. Delphi, Indiana, is a town of approximately 3,000 people, sitting quietly in Carroll County, a place where residents knew each other by name and children played outside without fear. On February 13, 2017, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German, known to friends and family as Libby, set out to walk the Monon High Bridge Trail, a popular local hiking area built along a former railroad corridor. It was President's Day, a school holiday, and the 2 friends were dropped off near the trailhead at approximately 1 p.m. They were never seen alive again. Their bodies were discovered the following morning, February 14, 2017, in a wooded area near Deer Creek, approximately half a mile from the bridge. The Carroll County community was immediately plunged into grief and fear. Law enforcement from multiple agencies, including the Indiana State Police, descended on the small town almost immediately. What followed was one of the longest and most publicly watched murder investigations in Indiana history, spanning more than 5 years, before an arrest was finally made. Richard Matthew Allen was born on August 7, 1971, and lived in Delphi, Indiana, at the time of the murders. He worked as a pharmacy technician at a CVS location in Delphi, a job that placed him in daily contact with residents of the community. He was, by all outward appearances, an unremarkable local man, married, employed, and known to neighbors without suspicion. Allen was not a transient figure or an outsider. He was embedded in the fabric of the very town where Abigail Williams and Liberty German grew up. In the early stages of the investigation, police conducted broad community interviews, and Richard Allen was among those interviewed. He was not identified as a suspect at that time. He continued living in Delphi, continued working at CVS, and continued moving through daily life as the investigation around him stretched on for years without resolution. The Indiana State Police released partial audio and a grainy image of a man walking on the Monon High Bridge Trail on the day of the murders in 2017, appealing to the public for help identifying the figure. That image, showing a man in a blue jacket and jeans, became one of the most widely circulated pieces of evidence in the case. Investigators also released a short audio clip in which a male voice said the words "down the hill," believed to be a command directed at the 2 girls. These 2 pieces of public evidence generated thousands of tips over the years, but for more than 5 years, no arrest was made. The evidence that ultimately broke the case open came from an extraordinary and deeply unsettling source. Before her death, Liberty German had activated her cell phone and managed to capture both video footage and audio of the man who approached them on the bridge. That recording, made under circumstances that remain almost impossible to comprehend in their horror, became the central piece of evidence in the investigation and eventually in the prosecution. Law enforcement confirmed that the recording captured the suspect's voice and partial image, providing investigators with direct evidence that no amount of time could erase. On October 28, 2022, Richard Allen was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Allen was 50 years old at the time of his arrest. His arrest came more than 5 years after the murders, shocking the Delphi community precisely because Allen was so familiar, so local, so... The Carroll County Prosecutor's Office formally charged Allen, and he was held without bond. Investigators alleged that Allen had been on the Monon High Bridge Trail on February 13, 2017, and that physical evidence connected him to the crime scene. Prosecutors alleged that unspent .40 caliber ammunition found near the victims' bodies was consistent with a firearm owned by Richard Allen. The case drew significant national attention following Allen's arrest, with media coverage spreading across the United States and internationally. True crime communities that had followed the case for years responded with shock, given that Allen had reportedly been interviewed in 2017 without being flagged as a suspect. The Indiana State Police confirmed that Allen had indeed been interviewed in the initial canvass of individuals known to have been in the area that day. The trial itself became a legal battleground, complicated by pretrial disputes over evidence handling, defense claims of investigative misconduct, and arguments over the admissibility of certain forensic findings. Allen's defense team raised concerns about the integrity of the investigation and challenged the evidence presented by prosecutors. Despite these legal challenges, the trial proceeded in Wabash County, Indiana, following a change of venue from Carroll County due to the intense local attention the case had generated. Richard Allen was convicted on October 28, 2024, exactly 2 years. After his arrest on 2 counts of murder, he was subsequently sentenced to 130 years in prison, the maximum available under Indiana law for the charges brought against him. As of the time of this documentary's production, Richard Allen remains incarcerated in Indiana, serving his 130-year sentence following conviction. The case, however, has not been entirely closed in the public consciousness. Allen's defense attorneys have indicated intentions to pursue appeals, citing concerns raised during trial about evidence handling and the conduct of the investigation. The legal proceedings generated significant controversy, including disputes over whether Allen's constitutional rights were fully protected during the investigative and pretrial phases. Some legal observers have noted that the case will likely face appellate scrutiny for years to come. The victims' families have spoken publicly about the conviction, expressing relief that a verdict was reached, while also acknowledging that no legal outcome fully restores what was taken from them on February 13, 2017. The Carroll County community, which lived for more than 5 years without answers, has described the arrest and conviction as a necessary step toward healing, though residents have also expressed the lasting damage done to their sense of safety and community trust. Independent journalists and true crime researchers who followed the case for years have noted that the investigation was complicated by the unusual nature of the evidence, that the length of time between the crime and the arrest, and the legal battles that emerged. After Allen was taken into custody, the question of whether any additional individuals were involved in the planning or execution of the crimes has been raised by some observers, though prosecutors presented the case as the work of Richard Allen alone. Law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation have maintained confidence in the conviction. The Delphi Murders left a permanent mark on Carroll County, Indiana, and on the broader national conversation about rural safety, community trust, and the vulnerability of children in spaces once considered safe. The Monon High Bridge trail, once a beloved local landmark, became associated entirely with the tragedy following February 2017. Community members organized annual memorials for Abigail Williams and Liberty German, and the 2 girls became symbols of a particular kind of American grief. Sudden, senseless, and unresolved for years. The case influenced law enforcement practices in Indiana, with state police agencies reviewing their protocols for community canvassing and evidence collection in rural homicide investigations. Nationally, the case was cited in discussions about digital evidence, specifically the role that cell phone recordings can play in criminal investigations, as Liberty German's recording represented an almost unprecedented form of victim-generated evidence in a murder case. Internationally, the case received coverage in the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and across Europe, largely driven by true crime media communities that had followed the investigation since 2017. The sentencing of Richard Allen to 130 years was reported by international outlets as a conclusion to one of the most closely watched unsolved murder cases in recent American history. Carroll County officials have spoken about the need for continued investment in community mental health resources in the aftermath of years of unresolved trauma. Hollywood has not touched this story yet, but the real events are more dramatic than any crime movie ever made. Consider that the evidence which convicted a killer was recorded by one of his victims, a 14-year-old girl, in the final moments. Before her death. That is not a screenwriter's invention. That is a documented, court-confirmed fact. Films about criminal investigations typically rely on forensic laboratories, veteran detectives, and dramatic interrogation scenes to build their narratives. The Delphi case offers something far more raw and far more human. A child's instinct to document danger, a community's 5-year search for a neighbor who turned out to be a killer, and a legal process that stretched across 2 years of pretrial battles before delivering a verdict. The scale of public engagement with this case, hundreds of thousands of online followers, thousands of tips submitted to police, years of community vigils, represents a level of real-world investment that most crime dramas only simulate. The reasons no major production has. Yet committed to this story likely include the ongoing nature of potential appeals, the sensitivity surrounding the victims' families, and the complexity of the legal record. When that production eventually arrives, it will find material that requires no embellishment. The murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German on February 13, 2017, and the conviction of Richard Allen on October 28, 2024, represent one of the most significant criminal cases in Indiana history. The case reshaped a community, tested a legal system, and demonstrated the extraordinary and terrible power of digital evidence in modern criminal investigations. 2 girls who set out for an afternoon walk became the center of a story that a nation could not stop watching. Richard Allen, the neighbor, the pharmacy technician, the familiar face, now serves 130 years in an Indiana prison. The families of Abby and Libby continue to carry what no verdict can fully address. Follow Dark Crime Decoded for stories Hollywood has not told yet.